All right, so I know that a few more folks may be joining us a little bit closer to Berkeley time, but I want to make sure that we have as much time as possible with our wonderful speaker today, who's joining us for the AmpEquity Speaker Series. So quickly, my name is Kendall. I am the co-chair for this Egal Student Advisory Board, and it is my great pleasure to get to introduce Kellie and InaMarie today. I want to welcome you to the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership's AmpEquity Speaker Series. This series is very near and dear to my heart and is designed to bring compelling voices to Haas's campus to further student, faculty, staff, and community engagement with equity fluent leaders who are forging new paths in fields as diverse as business, government, and journalism. Today, we have one of those very special voices. We're joined by InaMarie Johnson, who is the Chief People and Diversity Officer at Zendesk. Ms. Johnson has served in this role since June 2018. She previously served as the Senior Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer for Plantronics, Inc., an audio communications company. And she has also served as Chief Human Resources Officer at UTI Worldwide, Inc., a supply chain management company. Ms. Johnson holds a BA in Social Sciences with an emphasis on human resource management from UC Berkeley, so I gotta give a go Bears here, and an MA in Organizational Development and Management from John F. Kennedy University. We're incredibly lucky to have her joining us today. She has been recognized by San Francisco Business Times as among the most influential women in business, and also has been named one of Northern California's most powerful and influential women by the California Diversity Council. Before we get started, I want to mention that the format of today's event will be a 35-minute discussion followed by Q&A. Please go ahead and use the Q&A function to submit your questions throughout the event, and we will answer them live. The final thing I want to note is that InaMarie has been a longtime supporter of Egal, and her engagement on our advisory council has made the center better, wiser, and stronger. It is always a good sign when the person you look up to has someone to look up to. And so if I look up to Kellie as the center's founder and leader, I know that she looks up to InaMarie as one of the center's most dedicated advocates. So with that, I'm going to introduce Kellie McElhaney, founder and executive director of the Center for Equity, Gender, and Leadership, who will be leading the discussion. Go ahead, Kellie.
Thank you, Kendall. I really appreciate that introduction, both of InaMarie, who I can't wait to talk to, and saying you look up to me, because I was just telling you how much I look up to you for some work you're doing for us and for the world that's so critical. So InaMarie, we're supposed to be having wine. Last I talked to you, we were trying to figure out a day to meet in the city for wine. So here we are.
Absolutely.
I just have water.
Wine, Kellie.
I just have water, but soon, very soon. But it's so good to see you.
I have a nice drink, but it's water too.
Oh, it looks prettier than mine. First of all, thank you so much for the whole company for supporting our center. We would absolutely not be a center without the support of Zendesk. Along with Elena Gomez, you acquired us because you weren't there when the deal went down. So I hope you're happy with the partnership, but we absolutely are. So I just I'll start out, do use the Q&A, but I get to have InaMarie to myself for questions first. But could you talk a little bit about first of all, just your leadership journey? We'll weave in equity and inclusion later, but sort of what's been the arc of your leadership journey?
Sure, that's great. I'm happy to do that. So let me just firstly say thank you for having me. I am a big supporter of Egal, and so is Zendesk. So it's great to have fun like this and be able to chat with everyone. I do wish we were in person too. I was saying to the students earlier, I wish we were back on campus. But you know what? I think we're all figuring out that the future's changing, and so we're trying to reimagine how life is going to work. So it's still nice to be able to connect. I have to get my Go Bears in early.
We'll take it.
Yeah, Go Bears. I would say, one, Berkeley is a big part of who I am today. I was there in the 80s and did my undergraduate there, and also met my husband while he was there, and have a lot of family members who've gone through Cal. And so it's just great to see the way the university is continuing to evolve. And Egal is just a great example of that. So good to be here. All right. So you told me you were going to give me this really big question. It's like, where do you go with that?
I know. You can start when you're 3. Start when you're 3.
Yeah, let me start by talking about leadership and maybe the intersection of equity. I know you said that could come later, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about, how that's formed who I am as a leader. And I often will share with people that, some of my earliest learnings and understandings about belonging came from my parents. And I give them a lot of credit because one of the values that they sort of instilled in my brother and I have one brother, is this concept of you belong there. And I think when you're young and you are, being reinforced and validated as you belong in those environments, you have a voice, that gives you, that makes you set up a little bit straighter. That gives you a foundation that carries you forward. And that you belong there, you are worthy sort of value being instilled early. I mean, it took me through different early sort of life experiences. One in particular that was really impactful for me is I went to a high school that was not diverse at all. It was in the Bay Area, and I was the only African-American student in a class of about 400 high school students. And that you belong, you have a voice, use that voice to, to bring a unique perspective, to listen and to learn from others, but don't hide that. In other words, that's sort of like your secret power. That's your secret sauce. And so that sort of value also took me all the way into my career. And I would say, my entire professional career has been in the human capital space. That's what I love doing. That's what I'm passionate about. I did have a couple of years before I stepped into HR, but I've always cared about the experience that employees are having inside of their organizations. And so, I started my career with a company I'm not in the Bay Area today, but the Clorox company. And one of the things that I remember about Clorox is it had very diverse customers. If you think about who buys cleaning products or food products, it's a pretty diverse group of consumers. And I remember so early on in my leadership experience, the value of needing to have your workforce be able to tap into that diverse consumer experience that you're trying to create. I went on as part of my leadership to spend a decade with Honeywell, very large industrial, manufacturing, Six Sigma type company. And there, my experience as a leader was so formed by doing business in over 200 countries, which is what the company was doing at the time. And so going and traveling, I did, tons and tons of travel there, had 5 jobs, I think in 10 years is the way it worked out. And always trying to understand the culture of those different environments. How do you make the connection? How do you create human resource solutions that really tap into those unique, aspects of those different countries? And then in the last 10 years, my leadership has been, I've held 3 chief HR officer roles for 3 very different companies. But the one thing that was in common with all 3 of these companies is they were evolving and transforming. So I think being a change agent is sort of where I always find myself, helping these companies figure out how they're going to either become more enterprise or more global or more fill in the blank. And so keeping an eye out in those environments for ways to make sure that diverse perspectives are brought in, diverse employees get a chance not to just be a part of the workforce, but to actually thrive. I always talk about it's not just good enough to, say, oh, we have a lot of diverse perspectives. It's like, what do you do with that? Is the company thriving? Is that diverse perspective being recognized and seen and leveraged? So That's a little bit about, career and some of the early foundational values that I think have really stayed with me.
I really like how you talk about just the human experience, because I feel like we've gotten so far away from that, and even more so now because I'm experiencing you as a human through my screen. So I was curious about something you said about the global work you have done at your last company. How does diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging translate globally for you now in Zendesk? Or you've been a global leader. How does that translate? How it's got to be tough.
Yeah. I think there are a couple of ways. In particular, what we find that is unique in a lot of global environments is the need for connection and empathy. And so I believe if you can try and walk in the shoes of someone that's in a different country or having a different set of experiences, then that relationship gets stronger. And obviously that empathizing starts with listening. It starts with being able to ask, really great questions about what is needed, what solutioning looks like for that environment, tapping into whatever those diverse perspectives are. I would also say what's interesting we found, and I'm sure we'll talk about this, as we've been doing a lot of work looking at social injustice and racism, that some of the themes were the same. That some of the themes that we experience in the US of not being seen, of unconscious bias, of hurtful conversations, those things transcend the US. And so when we held some empathy circles, which we can talk about later, in Singapore, in Melbourne, in our Dublin, Ireland location, it was interesting how, even though we were in different parts of the globe, some of those themes and some of those experiences were the same. And what that, sort of reinforces for me is we got to do the work across the globe. We have to make sure that we have that diverse representation, that inclusion and belonging, and those equitable systems, regardless of what country you're in, because a lot of the same challenges exist.
Yeah, you started out so beautifully. Just you belong. Your voice matters. You are worthy. That's pretty universal no matter what country you're in, I would think. You talked about the empathy circles, and you touched a little bit on the anti-racism work that Zendesk is doing. Can you give us more information about what Zendesk is doing, and then what you, InaMarie, are most proud about?
Yeah. What I think Zendesk is doing is not staying silent. So I would start with that. When this year has been a tough year for a lot of us. We've seen a lot of things, and I believe, it was a really pivotal point in May when the world watched, an African-American man, George Floyd, lose his life in front of all of us. I think the world really snapped. And so at that point in time, one of the things we felt very strongly about is speaking out and against and not staying silent. And so we, put out messages both internally and externally about standing against anything that would be perceived as unjust or racial, and how we have to not just do the work individually, we have to partner and do the work collectively. And this is hard work. And so for that, I think that was step one, but it's not enough to just say stuff, right? We have to do the work. So we also published what we call our 5 commitments. Like, what are we really going to do the hard work? And those 5 commitments were across the board, everything from equipping managers with the right tools and education, to spending time looking at our equitable systems and producing one of our very first equitable policies, or equity policy, we call it. We also held these empathy circles. We held space for people to just be able to to share their stories, to heal, to grieve together. And what was powerful, Kelly, about those empathy circles is the role of leadership was to listen. My peers all participated. The entire C staff, our most senior 25 individuals sat through those 5 global empathy circles across 800 employees. And for many of the executives, those stories weren't known. Those stories and those experiences of what it is like to be, maybe in an underrepresented group in corporate America, those stories were being told for the first time. So I'm really, really proud of holding that space. But then the last thing I would say, or maybe the last 2 things that we've done, is we didn't just stop at like listening. That's an important step. But we had so many people talk about, how can I be an ally? What can I do? And so we wanted to prepare what we called an ally toolkit. Ally partnership, like how can you be a good ally? What does that actually look like? And get that in the hands of people who said, I don't want to just sit and listen. I want to be active. And so I think that was a great step. And then the last thing is we put dollars. We put investments out there. We cannot do it all by ourselves. So we chose partners, about 6 or 7 very global partners. These are partners, some are in Asia, some are in Europe, some are in the US, that are doing work to make these social injustice and racism experiences something that none of us wants to be a part of. So we invested and put our money where our mouth. So those are the 5 commitments. There's a lot in there.
But that's just since May that you've done all that. I mean, I know it was bubbling around, but like that's a pretty significant amount. I mean, two call outs. The Empathy Playbook is beautiful. I have a copy. I expect it's on your website, or anybody can get a copy.
It is. I was sharing with the students, part of doing the work for me and for Smina Pillai, who is our Vice President of Diversity, is putting it out there.
I love this. It's
open source.
Yeah.
This is not about us developing and keeping things. Our whole mission is to have, the SaaS world, the technical world, the world at large doing this work so that we all have a movement. So yeah, it's available.
I love it. And it's so beautifully designed. And
that's our creative team. I can take no credit for that.
Your graphics
that
people.
is the Zendesk creative team that is amazing.
And the other tool that I do use, Jennifer's giggling because I sent her one late at night, but you have a tool called the Thank You Machine.
Yes.
It's linked to empathy. Can you talk a little bit? And it's also free. So can you talk about that?
Yeah, it is born in one of our values as a company, which is, again, this empathy. How do you walk in the shoes of someone else, your customer, your coworker, someone maybe on your team? And so the Thank You Machine, again, a collaboration between creative, communications, and the DEI world, to just be able to thank people real time. And it's got all these cute, crafty little figures, and you build your own thank you person and you send it out there. And like many things, it started with an idea that was not from leadership. It was born from the workforce. Just as I want to say, our empathy circles, those started with one employee in our Madison, Wisconsin office saying, I will hold space. And then that was so powerful that it made my team and others want to come together and hold more.
Which just reminds us of how much power we each have. Like that all happened because of one person.
Totally.
That's it. Well, and I highly recommend the Thank You Machine. The little figures are so cute. This couldn't have been easy. So you did a lot. You did it fast. I don't want to. I'm going to ask you anyway. What were some lessons you learned along the way? Things that were more difficult than you thought they were going to be. Just the hard stuff that we just see, like your strength and your power, but there have got to be battles behind that.
Yeah. I'll talk about one thing that I wouldn't say struggling, but it is hard. And that is that we want our DEI efforts to be leader-led and not to just be from the human resource or corporate DEI team. And, you know, we know that leaders in business will say, well, I have a lot going on, you know, I'm accountable for a lot of things. And so I think what can make that not hard for the leader to pick up the baton and say, I'm going to focus on, let's just say, my diversity hiring, or I'm going to make sure that I get to know my underrepresented, you know, talent so that I can double down and focus on their development. I'm going to make sure when I'm doing the promotional cycle that I'm mindful of those people who may be bringing a diverse perspective. Like, if we want them to do those things, then we have to enable. We have to make sure that we get the tools and the resources. So right now we're spending a lot of time thinking about leader-led and what does it take. So I'm even changing and making investments in my team so that I can have dedicated resources who can pair up with the leaders and kind of be a one place to go for support around DEI. And then honestly, I give a shout out to Elena. You mentioned Elena, our fabulous CFO. She has helped us carve out investments. Like, you can't do this stuff and then expect it to all be free. When I first joined the company, we weren't investing a lot of dollars. And so, you know, at least whether it's your branding, you know, whether it's partnering for sourcing diverse talent, whether it is, you know, making sure, as I said, that you have other global partners, you have to spend some investment. So that is hard. That's kind of in the DEI. I'll say one other thing about, because you brought it up, that we're doing a lot and we're doing it fast. I think one learning I've had is to constantly walk that line between what's enough change to really make a difference and what's too much change that almost like chokes the organization. And early in my career, one of my first CHRO roles, I think we didn't do that well. We didn't think about the manager who has a lot of change coming his or her way and has to like adopt it and implement it. And I think a learning that I've had is you have to walk that line very finely, and you have to make sure that you're constantly looking at it from the person who's going to embed it, own it, and adopt it. Because if you're only looking at it as I'm getting all of my things done, you know, like we're working our strategies and lists, it can be too much. And that was a learning personally that I think I had as a chief HR officer, my first time, you know, in and having that responsibility.
It's got to feel really hard because we need change, and we've, you know, things are in a really bad state. We need change. We're up against what we're up against in November. And so I think everybody's so charged for change, and yet forcing change fast, as you said, can have all those negative, we don't have time for the negative consequences. We have to get it right now. I'm going to move to Q&A. I have another question, but I'll wait. Anybody, please submit questions in the Q&A. And I have a first question, InaMarie, that I'll ask you. When it comes, this is from Genevieve, she works with us though. When it comes to social justice, is there also a focus on gender, or is it more on race? Are we seeing more women, especially mothers, leaving the workforce in the face of COVID? How is this impacting DEI efforts, and what do we do? How do we maybe balance the prioritization differently or keep it the same?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. I hear a couple of things in there. So let me be super clear that our diverse efforts are about people that are diverse in many ways. While we are doubled down and focused on underrepresented talent, which can sometimes for us these days be African American and Hispanic in terms of we're tech, that's where we have some need. We have been on the journey for gender, and that's where I think, honestly, Zendesk partnered with Egal very early on to create Equity Fluent Leaders. So we continue to think a lot about gender, and then we're also doing a lot of work around other dimensions of diversity, bringing your whole self, you know, understanding that some of our employees have differences there that we need to focus on. We're also thinking about intersectionality, right? We're not just one thing. I'm not just one thing. You're not, Kelly. So that is important. So I do want to clear that up if it sounded like we were talking a lot about race. There's a lot of other dimensions, but I'm also not going to take my eye off of race because it's a problem and in tech, and I've got to work and fix that. As for women leaving the workforce because of COVID, you know, I was talking to the group before this started of students, we have seen an uptick in some of our attrition for women, but it's also a broader parenting and caregiver issue, which is what we experienced in Zendesk. That population, which is about 35% of our workforce, identifies as a caregiver or a parent. That population was really struggling in sort of the spring timing. And I give a lot of like hats off to my CEO who gives me bold challenges all the time. He was like, I want a big solution. I want a needle mover solution to help. And so we were able to stand up very quickly what we called our COVID caregiver leave. And it was paid leave for anyone who needed it that was dealing with a challenge of caregiving and parenting and supporting during the COVID. And it was able to be accessed in hourly increments, which was really hard. It's hard for the business to manage, but it's the right thing when you're trying to relieve tension in the system. And the other thing we did is we partnered again. We brought on care.com and we gave employees memberships so that you could get outside help for caregiving. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a pet. And what I want to say is all of that, you could say, well, those are like interventions that, you know, we're doing one at a time, but they're teaching us how to create more flexibility in the system, because the name of the game is really going to be flexibility. Overall, we've got to manage for outcomes and not manage people around hours and how long they're sitting like this, because that's what we're all moving towards. And the companies like us, who I think are going to focus and do that well, that'll bring women back into the workforce. That'll bring men in the workforce. That'll bring diverse people in general who need that flexibility. That's kind of the way we're all going to win, you know.
Yeah. And I love that. I mean, you're a leader in people, so it struck me because I don't think this way. I love that you talk about care, because I think that, you know, Facebook, there was some splintering around people who have people to care for due to COVID-19, but they aren't kids, and so there's no parental leave. And I think that's a really just really struck me as forward thinking. All right, to create a successful movement, this is Rosalind, there is usually a coalition of like-minded organizations. Are there other enterprises you're aligned with in addition to those 6 or 7 companies that you mentioned? Who are they? And thanks. It's Rosalind. She's so polite, positive.
That's great. I do think, number one, we are working on SaaS. So, you know, software as a service type companies. We have a network of chief people officers, and we do come together and we think a lot about how can we leverage each other's ideas and so forth. But I'd also offer up that I'm a part of the CNBC Executive Workforce Council, which spreads across a lot of different industries. And in that case, I find that, you know, you can learn from the education sector, the public sector, you know, more manufacturing type companies. And so I'm getting a lot there. And then we are doing a ton with partners. So some of our partners, I wanted to make sure I gave a shout out, Southern Poverty Law, the National Urban League. These are organizations that we're offering our executives to be a part of their board. And we're also looking at a process to have their executives from those organizations feed and be a part of ours to really stimulate that different thinking, because I agree with you, Rosalind, it's not just about groupthink. You know, sometimes the great idea comes from, an environment that's quite different than the one you're in.
I like the executive exchange too. I think that's so critical with these organizations.
That was a SMITA one.
I think SMITA's on. Hi, SMITA. Yeah. That's great. Okay, Lucinda asks, how do you see the federal government's efforts? Oh, here you go. This is a really tough one.
Well, this is, you know what I have to say, this is why I love Berkeley. This is why I went to Berkeley, because radical change agents. Well, I mean, I love it.
she's asking you to solve for something that I can't wait. How do you see the federal government's efforts, the executive order to ban, she says un-American, I think it was actually labeled anti-American diversity and inclusion affecting corporate efforts. One of my sons works for the federal government. His efforts to move diversity forward are now being abandoned by his department to follow the executive order.
Yeah.
It's a hard one.
It is. And what I guess I would offer up is I'm a learner, and I try to create a culture of learning and evolving. And so anytime a learning experience is taken away, or development, the opportunity to grow in your thinking, to, like we've talked about, hear a different perspective, to pick up a tool or approach, that is never feels great to me. So I couldn't help but look at that order and feel like that's silencing and taking away that experience that I think has been, important to me as a leader, and is so important to any employee to be able to have access to learning. I obviously get the idea that any learning experience has to be done in a way that doesn't, that embraces people to want to learn and open up. And so I feel confident in the training and educational tools that many companies out there are doing. I'll just give a shout out for one. We're partnering with Mary Frances Winters Group. They're doing 800 training sessions for our people leaders, or for our 800 people leaders, I guess not 800 sessions. But we're not making that mandatory. We are saying this is a way you equip yourself. This is the way you have tools. So I hope that the government, I'm not a government employee, can get to a point where we don't take that away from any employee to learn, to experience. And I'm sorry and saddened that any employee, that works for the federal government may not have an opportunity. I think there is a way to always do those trainings that doesn't alienate, but it also helps us all open our eyes to, we all have biases. I love that quote that says, if you have a brain, you have a bias.
Yeah.
It just happens. So it's not a bad thing to learn about that, to learn how to work through those biases, to make sure that if they're coming in at the wrong time, hiring decisions, pay decisions. So I don't know if that's helped, I don't.
Well, they're already going after, they're already going after Microsoft. So they're pressing this, and I'm just stupefied, but
yeah.
Okay,
maybe, what I would offer there, Kelly, is, and this is not being political, like vote,
No, 100%.
Make your voice heard. The only way change happens, if we're not, is we have to make our voice and our perspectives known. So vote,
100%.
Vote like your life depends on it.
Because it does. I know. This is the year that it's very true. Can you speak about some of the tools you would consider to be effective? This is great because you took your organization through a mindset shift. I mean, they might have been on that path, but you took them down pretty quickly. Some tools that you would consider being effective and towards shifting mindsets and behaviors to being more inclusive.
So we talked about those empathy circles and the power of listening, but very quickly from the empathy circles, we developed the allyship toolkit. So I think that is a tool, and it's very helpful in shifting mindsets, but it gives people very tangible things to go do and put into their everyday experience, whether you're a manager or an employee. So I would give that one as one. I also would say this awareness training that we're doing with the Mary Frances Winters group, what I love is it's not only personal reflection, it is also about filling up your toolkit and being able to, whether it's questions or how to have a conversation, as I said, how to recognize bias in interviewing. One powerful little tool that we use is who is in your personal network? You know, who's in your personal board of directors, and how can you make that more diverse, more rich, and bring in people that have different experiences. I was talking with one of the students who were talking about founder CEOs. Oftentimes, you know, founders of startup tech companies aren't great about putting people into their personal network that might look different, that might come from different experiences, that would question and ask and challenge. So those are some of the tools that come to mind. But as always, I think we're a really open source type of environment. If you send me a note, I can also get you other things that you may be interested in.
Yeah, I already see. I'm trying to monitor Q&A and chat.
I know, I'm looking at the Q&A.
People are saying, where's the ally? Smitta's on, so I know Smitta will be on top of it.
And again, we're open source. I mean, a lot of this stuff,
fantastic.
We're putting it out there, and we don't want to just keep it to ourselves. That's not the goal.
I'm excited to see your ally tool, because I know it's going to be beautiful, first of all, but the toolkit is really critical. Yeah. Oh, here's just a quick, but one of my favorite questions from Kate. What is some of the best advice you've ever received?
Yeah, I love those kind of questions too. One that I go back to my Clorox days. I worked for a leader who told me to cast my net wide. And I remember thinking, like, cast my net wide. Okay, what is he talking about? And it's simple, but it's powerful. It's that you really have to put yourself out there and, like we're talking about, establish that wide range of interactions, of relationships, of influence, that when you do that, there is a richness to your life professionally and personally that comes along, and there's a learning. And so it's just kind of like one simple little thing I always keep in, like, am I being wide? Am I being inclusive? Am I opening my mind? I also have a leader on my team. She likes to say open minds, open hearts, and it's true, because it's a heart and a head thing. And then I'll just still give a shout out to my parents. I think that best advice of you belong, like, use your authentic, unique difference to, learn, grow, to make the place that you are better.
It's funny that the next question is from Kate O'Connor, who's one of our investors, along with Zendesk. She says, it's clear your parents gave you the great advice about knowing you belonged. How would you adjust or add to that advice now in the current environment as we raise our children?
That is a good question, Kate. How would I change or add?
What would you add?
Yeah. I think the new aspect is that when you are unique and different, you probably have to realize that is not going to always feel comfortable. So what I would add to it is get comfortable being uncomfortable. Like some of these conversations that we're having, some of these experiences, they don't always, I don't want it to sound like, it's going to be a cakewalk. But I do believe if you're willing to do the work and you're willing to, some of these things are going to feel a little bit uncomfortable. So maybe that's the added piece. Like, you belong, bring your unique difference, but know that it's not going to always be absorbed right away. It's not going to always be embraced. People are sometimes not going to be comfortable with that right away. And so, stepping into that uncertainty, but willing to stay in it through change.
And I think that's hard with parenting, because you want your kids to be so comfortable. You almost do it in the reverse. We force comfort on them so they don't have the experience being uncomfortable, and it doesn't serve people in the end.
But it's not realistic.
Yeah. I'm too late. My girls are already off at school, so.
Well, mine are adults, so, you know.
I guess it's never
imagine
too late,
having
right?
an HR person for your mom. When my kids were little, they didn't play like house. This is a real story. Ask Aaron, my daughter's 30, Aaron's 27. I caught them playing business. They were playing like company stuff. And you
love it.
know how you're rubbing off, but honestly, people always ask me, what are you most proud of? Like, that's what I'm most proud of.
That's cool.
While I was doing career stuff.
They were arguing over who got to be CEO as opposed to who got which doll or toy. That's great. Desiree asks, my organization is working to put together a Women in Leadership virtual webinar series. Can you recommend more women in leadership who may be willing to speak about their experience with gender equity?
Yeah. I'm not sure if Desiree's thinking of an organization or actual women. But what I would offer is, I think these days what I love is that a lot of women that are, chief fill in the blank, financial officer, product officer, are parts of networks where they're giving back. And they are willing to talk about their experience. So number one, start with your own company. Are there senior people that you can tap into? I would say, your organization is always hosting series that, feature women in leadership. I think, look at your partners. I mean, a lot of our partners. There is one, I'm not a part of this organization, but I'm two organizations that I've heard about that have piqued my interest. One is called Him for Her. This is Him for Her. This is an organization that I got a call recently about a board seat, and the entire organization is around getting more women into boards. And I loved this, and so this person found out about me through the Him for Her organization. So I'll just give a shout out to that one. Like, I want to learn more about them, and the other one is Chief. I know that, they are doing a lot of work to bring women who are, as I said, chief, executives together to share their learning, to open up doors, to pay it forward, and so forth. I don't find many women not willing to do that.
I know. Chief is great. So Jana Rich Talent Group merged with Chief. And that's just,
they did. I did see that. Yeah.
I just love Jana. Great female leader.
Small World, they helped find Smita for us.
I thought that Jana said that.
Who brought us, our head.
Well, she does her job well, or they. It's a whole company now, but that's fantastic. There's Rosalind suggests another organization, an international women's organization, and she said she's happy to help. I'm going to ask you a hard question, but we already talked about it. At least I would find it hard. How do you think, how have you felt about corporate America's reaction to Black Lives Matter?
Yeah, and you told me you were going to ask that one, so I wanted to be thoughtful about it. And the headline is, I feel mixed. I've had a range of emotions. One emotion and experience I've had is at times feeling tired that corporate America, had been in human resources 30 years, that we're still not where we need to be, and tired and frustrated and disappointed that people of color, specifically African-American men and women, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, like, those are experiences as a mother of a Black man, having a daughter. Like, when those experiences come up for me, those are not separate experiences that I don't, have in my professional world. I'm a whole person, and I show up with my whole self. So those things were really tough. And in the experience, I think many of us, as someone of color in a company, when a lot of that was going on, it was hard. It was hard to show up and be present and still go through that, and which is why the empathy circles and so forth made a real difference. But I know I was super transparent with my team. I remember that meeting I had with them right after the death of George Floyd, and I talked about being pretty broken and what that's like. So which takes me to my second emotion, which is I am certain times intrigued and more positive that we are having the conversations that, frankly, in business, we couldn't have about race. We couldn't have about privilege. We couldn't have about other underrepresented, groups. Those weren't conversations we were having. So I'm glad someone said to me, like, the muzzles are off, like people are now having these conversations. So that makes me feel a little bit more, positive. And then the third thing is, I think the reaction I have is it makes me want corporate America to do the real hard work. This is not easy stuff. And so figuring out your commitments, making investments in them, looking at your representation, looking at your inclusion, looking at who thrives in your organization, who gets selected for promotions, understanding your pay, this is the body of work. So, I want us to do better. I want us to step up. I want us to do the heavy work. So I think, for me, it's been a range of different emotions and experiences. Hopefully that answers it for you.
No, it's real and it's raw. I mean, it's where you are, and everyone is for different reasons. And hopefully it's a movement, not just a moment, right? That's the goal. As tech continues, let me see where we are, 118. As tech continues to be challenged in diverse representation, especially at the top, how do you feel about goals and including those goals into the incentive metrics for leaders? In other words, pay for performance.
I feel good about it. And
awesome.
Here's why. I believe this goes back to sort of my Honeywell Six Sigma days. What gets measured gets done. I've always subscribed to that. So when you put measurement and you put goals and aspirations down, just like for any other parts of business, you get focus, you get attention. You need to make sure that's the right attention and the right focus, and not have undesired consequences. But we have goals. So we have a couple of things that we're working on. I'll just share. In the representation space, we recognize that our application flow for underrepresented groups isn't what it needs to be. Like, we don't have enough candidates. We need to source more candidates. So before I can even make offers, I need to increase the pool of people that we're even seeing, that we're having conversations with, that we're interviewing. So that's one of our goals. We are also, for the very first time, establishing a baseline inclusion index that will look at the manager employee experience. It'll look at things like psychological safety and trust. And from getting that baseline, we're going to really know where are we on that, inclusion journey, and how can we make that better. So that's like one of our goals. As for the last part of the question, taking it all the way into pay for performance, I think we're going to get there. We don't have that today. You can look at, my proxy. We don't tie executive bonus payout to that. But actually, my total rewards leader knows that we are working on the comp committee deck right now for our next board meeting. And you can best believe we're going to be having that conversation about what should that look like. And how do you do it again in a way that it drives the right behaviors and does not cause unintended consequences? I think that's the key.
I can't wait to hear that when you get to your board. I have a feeling it's going to be quite successful. As we go to a close, people in the room, often the Zoom room, it's so weird that it's a room. People want to know what are some specific, if you think back around on ways in which you're successful, things that have helped you be successful, or you're watching other business leaders be successful in advancing diversity, inclusion, equity, belonging. What are some of the best tools and strategies that have worked for you? You talked about, you can't force change too quickly. You can't just be changing on your terms. What are just some other tools that really you've had to hone along the way, or you've watched others use that are quite successful?
Yeah. I do think it's interesting as I try to do a fast scan over the last hour of what we've talked about. I'll start with kind of that empathy and relationship. So I think like people are looking for specific tools, and yet in front of you, so much of DEI is about conversations and creating space. So I am going to give a plug again for, if you need help thinking through how do you set up an environment to have those stories and conversations start, I think that's a really great place to begin. And it's in a company, it's in an organization. How do I have an environment where people feel safe to share? And then what do you do about it? And I do love the allyship toolkit. I also believe something I've learned is define it more broadly. I think when I think about being on this journey, early days, so much of it was about hiring and representation. And something we're going through right now is, I'll just put it out there, like a little bit of a leaky bucket kind of syndrome, which sometimes means you're bringing people in, but you're not able to, you're bringing people in as fast in the diverse space as you are, experiencing turnover. So one of the tools and things that we're doing is getting up underneath that. What does it take to retain? So I think so many times people put a lot of emphasis on the hiring machine,
right?
Not nearly enough on the retaining, which usually goes to, this is what we're finding, engagement and inclusion, like I said, the belonging piece, the thriving, but also the development. Having access to real development experiences, having clarity about career progression, like how do I move forward, understanding career pathing and movement and, sponsorship for that movement. Yep. And then, of course, rewards, like, who do those rewards go to? So I think what I would, offer is define it more broadly than just the hiring and the representation. Touch on the inclusion, touch on the equitable systems, and understand, what you can be done there. I believe with that broader definition, you have a much better chance of having impact. And don't try to go it alone.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Like partnerships like Egal. Partnerships like, the training organization we talked about. Partnerships like social justice groups who have experts. Like, there is no reason to go on a DEI journey alone. I don't think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, it's a theme that's come up in my life too, is that I feel like some organizations can go at it separately because now everybody wants to say they are a leader in DEI, and it's exclusionary. Like, we should be including everybody on this path.
Which is kind of opposite of the whole.
I know. It makes sense to me, InaMarie, but I'm having a hard time with making it make sense for others. Yeah. The last question I'm going to ask, because I think so many people are, at least I'm just going to ask you to help me, because my students come to me and they're so tired. There's like sort of two competing feelings out there. Three, they're so tired. They're scared to death of America and this next phase that we're headed into. And then I'll put the onus on non-Black people. They feel like I guess I am one of those, we're not doing enough. Like, there's this constant. So we at Egal have this personal anti-racism commitment whiteboard. Ishita on our team built it. It's wonderful. It's for the Haas community. And then I also did it in my class as part of our lecture and put them into breakout rooms. And they came back, and the vulnerability of their discussions was like, I didn't want to be judged. Because I said, first of all, I didn't care as much as their commitments, but how did that feel? How was that experience for you? And what ultimately came out is, I don't want to be judged because I feel like I'm not doing enough. So they're exhausted. They're any kinds of solutions or things that are working for you on any one of those three, the feeling that you're not doing enough, the exhaustion, or the fear of. Yeah.
I think we need to be there for each other. I have this saying, like, we need to give each other a little bit of grace, because we all are having a range of different feelings. And so realizing that, yeah, people might feel like I don't want to be judged, or people might feel like I don't want to say the wrong thing. I know I've had people say that to me, like I'm a leader and I just don't know what to say, so I'm not going to say anything. So knowing that maybe on the other side is your workforce or your team giving you a little bit of grace and space to kind of be vulnerable and to make a few mistakes, and not be judged. I think that's just something we can all work more on. But I have this other little way of saying, like, surround yourself with some people who will also fill you up, and build you up and join you in doing the work. There is power in that, and in knowing that there are supporters and so forth, and people who want to do the work. And I think it's a lot of the things we've talked about, like partner, and just know that some of this is uncomfortable, the idea that the hard work is never easy. And maybe a little bit of self-care, like, we have to remember to take care of ourselves and to be kind to ourselves. Sometimes we're the hardest, I know I can remember that. I need to remember that more than not.
That joy, self-care is part of a revolution. And I just heard somebody say self-care is part of being an ally, because you have to be an ally to yourself. Yeah. And I thought that was really, and
I said to my leaders yesterday, you can't take care of your team and others. If you're not taking care of yourself. And like, what is your self-care plan? And even at the executive level. I will give, maybe one came to mind. We're having a lot of positive experience with Modern Health. They are one of our partners, and they are providing everything. This is not therapeutic. It's more forward thinking, coaching, and support. So we have brought their platform in to all Zendesk employees have access. And I would throw that out there as a resource.
That's really helpful.
They had a press release, I guess it was last week, about the partnership that Zendesk has with Modern Health. So I do think that they're an organization that cares a lot about self-care and of leaders and others, so that you can, build that into your organization.
That is really powerful right now, with just the implications of what all is going on. Some of the themes, it's not repetitive, because the more it is repetitive as answers for various questions, the more it means that is what we need to be focusing on. But the empathy, the focus on the relationships, the grace. My undergrad team class 3 years ago called it A Maze of Grace. And somebody kind of sang it in the Amazing Grace. We need to give each other a maze of grace. Starting the conversations, really just as creating space. We can't all sit here and grieve, and we are, but grieving alone, being tired alone, being angry alone, we have to create the space for others. Everybody on this call, you can see why we're so incredibly fortunate to have Zendesk as our core corporate founding partner, and just so grateful to you for all the work that you do, InaMarie, for all the work you do for us at Haas, and Smita, I know, is on this call, and Elena Gomez is a Haas alum.
It's mutual.
Thank you.
We need great partners. And as I said in the beginning, Egal was an early, founder in this space of creating equity fluent leaders. And that's a level of leadership that is game changing. So please keep doing what you're doing, and we're going to be your partner.
You're not getting rid of us. You're not getting rid of us. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in, and just go and have go start a conversation, go get uncomfortable and stay in your uncomfort, and then do something for yourself, self-care. That's the takeaway. But thanks everyone. Stay safe, and appreciate everyone here.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye.